Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we are specifically going to talk about Wizards Presents and the biggest news in Wizards Presents. What's that? What's the biggest news in Wizards Presents? The Dungeons and Dragons Edition Wars are over. It's done. It's done, people. It's time to lay down your virtual weapons and end the Dungeons and Dragons Edition Wars. Many of us, you, me, we have virtually fought bravely in the Edition Wars for nigh on decades, right? Like, some of us have been in the Edition Wars for 40 years, right? Like, it's been going on for a long, long time, all right? Like, and you are, and I am, a grizzled virtual veteran of the very real Dungeons and Dragons Edition Wars. So just to put the stakes in the ground and make sure everybody knows what we're talking about, what are the edition? What are the what were the Dungeons and Dragons Edition Wars? Well, they were very real, and they raged. Woo! They started in 1989, all right? Because everything before then was 1E. So actually, 1E went from 1974 to 1989, right? And then 1989 to 1999 was all Dungeons and Dragons 2E. 1999 to 2008 was all Dungeons and Dragons 3E. 2008 to 2014 was Dungeons and Dragons, was specifically Dungeons and Dragons 4E, and 2014 to right now was Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, but Dungeons and Dragons 5E really no longer functionally exists. Chris Perkins said it. It's just DND, right? It's just Dungeons and Dragons, right? And so today is the day. Let's mark this date in memory, right? Like, really important. March 16th, 2020. It will go down in infamy, right? Like, some of the beginning of the masked years, right? Like, and there, unfortunately, we usually remember, well, July 4th. That's when America started, right? August 18th, 2022, Chris Perkins slammed the stake into the ground and said the Edition Wars are done. Done, right? What he said specifically is he said, we looked at Dungeons and Dragons and we realized we are no longer thinking about Dungeons and Dragons as editions, right? There's no need for a new edition, and there is no plans to make a new edition. It is just Dungeons and Dragons. The editions, and that's it. He quite literally just said, hey, we don't think about Dungeons and Dragons as editions anymore. And so what he's saying, in my humble opinion, is I don't care if you're playing 1E, I don't care if you're playing 2E, I don't care if you're playing 3E, I don't care if you're playing 4E, and I don't care if you're playing D&D now, right? And I've said this for a long time. Wizards of the Coast has never, ever accepted the term D&D 5E, and they're flat out rejecting it now. They're like, it's just D&D, right? So the reality is, they're saying editions don't matter. If your book, in my humble opinion, what this declaration means is, if your book has TSR and Dungeons and Dragons on the cover, if it has Wizards of the Coast and Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons, you're in. Like, it does. Editions do not matter. The Edition Wars are dead, and they are flat out declaring that they have absolutely no intention of ever making a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons, right? What they're saying is, we're here. Like, we got to squash this beef, and the Edition Wars are finished. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, you looking at a grizzled, scarred virtual veteran of the very real Dungeons and Dragons Edition Wars. I fought hard virtually for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And I said, hey, y'all need to get off that nonsense D&D 1E. Y'all need to get off that nonsense D&D 2E. Those crusty old, and I'm not going to repeat. This is a day of peace. This is a day of peace. I'm not going to repeat my insults, right? But I was like, you got to get off of D&D 3E. You got to get off of D&D 4E. You got to be on the D&D now, right? You got to be on the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Well, I am laying my virtual weapons down, right? Chris Perkins is a very intelligent man, and I think the whole D&D design team thought very hard about this, and I think they're right. It helps us. This is exactly like when Abraham Lincoln was like, okay, Civil War over, right? Like, what's the point? We got to be one nation, right? And Chris Perkins is the Abraham Lincoln of Dungeons and Dragons at this point. He's saying, hey, forgive and forget, right? It's all D&D. It's just Dungeons and Dragons. Nobody cares about editions. These divisions have haunted us for decades. We're trying to, the real enemy, and in my humble opinion, I think the reason why they went down this road is they're like, the real enemy is not these ridiculous false divisions between D&D 1E, D&D 2E, D&D 3E, D&D 4E, and D&D 5E. It's petty and it's small and it forgets the real enemy. In my humble opinion, I think the real enemy of Dungeons and Dragons has been the same every single day from day one, 1974 to day now, right? Like all 48 years of history of Dungeons and Dragons has had the same enemy: video games. Video games are the real enemy of Dungeons and Dragons. It's what actually needs to be defeated. When you're like, well, like, what about other things? Movies are almost in the dirt now anyway, right? Movie, like, since March 16th, 2020, we haven't been able to even create a $2 billion movie. Before that date, we were working on $3 billion, right? Like, people are still wondering, are movies dead yet? Movies are not the threat. Books sure ain't the threat, right? Like, who reads anymore, right? You do, I do, about almost nobody else does, right? Like, nothing has come out to take the Harry Potter crown. Nothing has come up to be the new Games of Thrones. Books are dying, movies are dying, and the reality, but trust and believe, video games ain't. They are the actual dragon. Ben Riggs is looking for a dragon to slay. That's the actual dragon that needs to be slain, right? Is to slay the dragon, Dungeons & Dragons needs to really beat video games. It really needs to beat video games. And get this, I think America needs Dungeons & Dragons to beat video games, because there ain't a parent in the world who's going, boy, I really am glad my kids play a lot of video games. Or my adult son or adult daughter plays a lot of video games. That ain't happening, right? What you are seeing is a lot of people are like, Dungeons & Dragons requires hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of reading and encourages socialization. Actually, not like as a couple TED Talks saying that happens, but every parent knows that's a bunch of bunk, right? Like, and so Dungeons & Dragons is real and it's going forward. So I am officially, I'm okay. I don't want to promise because I got, I lay down habits slowly, right? Like, but I am going to attempt to take the energy from Chris Perkins of peace, and I am officially laying down my virtual weapons and giving up my ranks in the army of of D&D edition defense, right? And I am becoming a virtual civilian again. I am exiting the D&D edition wars. I think Chris Perkins is right. The D&D edition wars no longer serve any purpose. It's just D&D. So if you a D&D 1E player, you a D&D 2E player, you a D&D 3E player, you a D&D 4E player, peace to you. I'm going to try to be a lot more peaceful to you. I even have one distinct action I'm going to take tomorrow, which I think might surprise one person. And it's, this is where we're at. It's time to make peace. The edition wars are done. I am a grizzled scarred virtual veteran of the Dungeons & Dragons Edition Wars. I definitely laid down some opponents and took some blows virtually in that war. But it's time. The Edition War, Chris Perkins has spoke, right? And it's done. We're done. We're done with the Edition Wars. Let it be. Peace to each and every one of you. That's my humble opinion. What's yours? Are you happy that the Dungeons & Dragons Edition Wars are finished and over? Are you going to be are you going to lay down your virtual weapons and step back from the fray? Or are you going to be like those people on that island after World War II that didn't know the war, didn't know the war was over, still had their weapons up, right? They're virtual. Now those were not virtual weapons, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.